Pleasant greetings, y'all. Proud Filipina Charms Espina here, who's never relied on school alone for her education. Then again, college enrollment has been dropping steadily in the United States since the turn of the last decade. The COVID-19 pandemic precipitated that slide. Kids or teenagers and their parents have done the math and figured out one simple fact. A college education or degree is no formula for success, let alone survival. VOA's Inside Story takes a closer look at how perceptions and philosophies in higher education have changed, driven by a rapidly evolving and tech-driven global community. In this presentation, The Price of Learning.
This week on The Inside Story, The Price of Learning. It's back to school season for much of the Northern Hemisphere. What does it cost to get an education, and is it even worth it? Meanwhile, a humanitarian crisis grips Sudan, and yet another unfolds in Ukraine. Now, on The Inside Story, The Price of Learning.
Welcome to The Inside Story. I'm Elizabeth Lee in Washington on the campus of the George Washington University, just a few blocks from the White House. More than 900,000 students from around the globe come to the United States each year to pursue college degrees, overcoming challenges ranging from high costs to restrictive visas. They often leave behind unimaginable hardships as they study far from home. However, returning home is where many students intend to put their America diplomas to work, hoping that what they learned here will help them improve the lives of their families and fellow countrymen. As the school year begins in the United States, we'll explore the value of an American college degree. According to Forbes, as of 2021, more than half of Americans aged 25 to 64 possess some form of higher education, whether that is through a university degree or industry-recognized certifications. However, for foreign students who are interested in studying in the U.S., the pursuit of knowledge may appear intimidating even before it starts. We spoke with Carol Kim, Vice President for Global Recruitment, Admissions, and Financial Aid at New York University, which is one of the most popular destinations for international students.
I think families should really sit down and say, what is important? What is the importance for us as a family and for the student who is actually looking? What are they looking for in their college experience? And so a U.S. college experience offers things that are very different than a college experience elsewhere. And I say that because here is also a place where you can come and be undecided. Undecided doesn't exist in any other part of the world. And so someone who actually has turned 17 or 18 or 19 years old, they're a young adult, and they're not really sure what they want to do yet. In most other parts of the world, you have to decide. And that's what you're going to study. And that is what your path is set on. This is a place that we actually recognize that your frontal cortex is not quite formed yet. Your brain is still developing. You're still trying to figure out who you are as a person, and that we do not have students declare their major from the beginning. You can, if you would like. You can decide if you are very decided on the fact that you want to be a filmmaker. You would like to be an engineer. You want to come and start from the very beginning to be a neuroscientist. I mean, you can do all those things, but you can also come to college anywhere in the US and be undecided and explore. And I think curiosity and exploration is something that we in US higher education really support, as well as we think it's an important part of a student's discovery. And so it's something that is different than other parts of the world. And if that is something that is exciting for a family to see and to experience, I think it would be great. This would be a great place for them to come to.
More than 90% of American school children study in the public school system. However, it's important to note this number includes a variety of factors. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, approximately 59% of children in the United States aged 5 and younger who are not enrolled in kindergarten have experienced some form of early childhood education, commonly known as daycare. This early form of education serves as the initial stepping stone for many children, putting them on their paths toward elementary, high school, and beyond. VOA's Arash Arabasadi conducted interviews with 3 experts who play a crucial role in shaping how children learn today, with the aim of preparing them for higher education.
The building blocks of education. And according to the U.S. Census Bureau, early childhood programs like this one at the YMCA are where it all starts for nearly 7 million American children. That's nearly a third of the entire childhood population. Any child from infant to 5 years old can attend a program like this at one of the YMCA's roughly 1,000 early childhood education centers, where more than 100,000 children spend some or all of their days. And that includes nutritious meals. But childcare doesn't come cheap. While each YMCA location is different, the price tag can be thousands of dollars per month. Organizers know not everyone can afford that.
Our Head Start program, we have 10,000 kids in Head Start, which is not an astronomical number, but that's 10,000 youth who are in low-income areas that are able to go to programs with little to no cost.
But they say the value is in preparing the kids of today for the schooling of tomorrow. The National Education Association, or NEA, represents about 3 million members, including teachers and support staff that make learning possible for the more than 90% of U.S. children that attend public school.
I really believe if this country takes the next step and invests what it needs to in public education, we will have and continue to have a world-class system that will prepare every individual for their future.
Even if that future looks different for everyone.
Some students don't want to go to university right away, or they might not want to go at all. They might want to choose a different career path. So that's why having counselors, that's why having the right professionals in every school to help students make those decisions when they're in those formative years. Every student has to do what they feel is best for what they're interested in and where they can most contribute to our society. And I really believe that the public school system is the place to begin that process.
Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
The war in Ukraine has damaged thousands of schools and destroyed hundreds. As a result, students living near the battle zones are facing significant challenges in accessing education. Heather Murdoch reports from eastern Ukraine. It is important to note that this report contains graphic images that may be unsettling to some viewers.
Every school in the city of Liman, Ukraine has been damaged, and many are destroyed. This school was hit before the city was captured by Russia in May 2022, and it has remained shut down since Ukraine took the city back 4 months later.
Over here, we ran long and short distances for gym class. Here we played football. On the second floor was a cafeteria. On the first floor was an assembly room.
We had assemblies there.
In the basement, we had industrial arts and health classes.
Now, as the battles once again approach Liman, with an attack killing 8 civilians in early July, students say they are facing yet another year of the online education that began with pandemic lockdowns. Local leaders say volunteers provide some supplies and internet links.
They are not enough, but they provided us with laptops, tablets, printers, and stationery items. But it was very, very difficult.
But students say supplies are useless when battles draw near, as the internet is down or only available in hospitals or military bases. The Ukrainian government says thousands of schools have been damaged in the war and hundreds are destroyed. Studying online under these conditions is better than no education at all, but just barely, says Zakhar.
I'd rather study at school than on the phone online. On the phone, sometimes the topics are not even clear. At school, they will explain everything to you, show you, and you write things down, go to the blackboard, answer questions.
Other students tell us they are forgetting more from their in-person school days than they are currently learning. In Liman, there are just over 500 children struggling to get an education, as most families have long fled the area. Across Ukraine, millions of children's educations have been disrupted. Millions more children have fled the country, and more than 500 have been killed. Heather Murdoch, VOA News, Liman, Ukraine.
As Russia's war on Ukraine continues, Ukrainian leaders claim that Russia has been holding over 20,000 Ukrainians captive since the start of its full-scale invasion. Reporting from Warsaw, Poland, journalist Lysia Bakalets shares the heart-wrenching story of a woman who has been anxiously waiting for her husband since his detention in October when he was taken to a prison in Moscow.
He sent me this selfie and said, "Look, I'm officially a volunteer now."
Olga and Yuri Kayovy are from Kherson in southern Ukraine. When the war started, Yuri joined the local Red Cross initiative, bringing humanitarian aid from Ukrainian-controlled Zaporizhia to Kherson, which Russia occupied at the time. On one of these trips, Yuri was arrested by Russian forces.
On August 6, 2022, an acquaintance who was with Yuri called me and told me that my husband had been detained.
Later, she found out that her husband had been held in the occupied cities of Melitopol and Kherson and then transferred to a detention center in Simferopol. She heard no more and feared he was dead.
On October 6, a lawyer from Simferopol called me. She sent me a photo of a note handwritten by my husband. That's when I realized that he was alive. The lawyer said Yuri was accused of participating in international terrorism.
She said that a couple of weeks later, the lawyer informed her that her husband had been taken to the Lefortovo prison in Moscow. This October, it will be a year since he has been there, and there are many more like him, civilians from Ukraine considered Russian-held hostages. The UN says there are hundreds of cases. Ukrainian leaders say there are tens of thousands. Russia does not acknowledge holding civilians at all, let alone its reasons for doing so.
The Ukrainian Parliament Commission for Human Rights claims about 23,000 to 25,000 Ukrainian civilian hostages, so such a high number.
The Kayov family's story was included in the film Her Sons, which was based on evidence collected by the Raphael Lemkin Center for Documenting Russian Crimes in Ukraine.
The film has 4 stories about civilian hostages. 3 of them are currently in prison in Russia, 2 in Moscow's Lefortovo prison. The 3rd is in the city of Rostov. The 4th person spent 54 days in captivity and then occupied Kherson and is now free.
Director Hanna Berehova says there is enough material for at least 3 more sequels of the film. Analysts say that the only thing relatives and human rights defenders can do for captive Ukrainian civilians is publicize their cases. Unlike prisoners of war, abducted civilians are not part of exchanges under international law.
Prisoners of war at least have an international status. It is stated in the Geneva Convention, but when it comes to civilian hostages, their captivity has no legal basis.
She says that in any case, exchanging Ukrainian civilians for Russian prisoners of war is not an option for Ukraine.
Without exaggeration, there are millions of Ukrainians in the occupied territories, And if the Ukrainian state allows exchange of Ukrainian civilians for Russian soldiers, then by tomorrow we'll have another 20,000 plus civilian hostages.
Ukrainian authorities and human rights activists are calling for international third-party mediation to help gain the release of captured civilians. Olga Kayova, meanwhile, has managed to find her husband a private lawyer. Thanks to the lawyer's efforts, she periodically gets notes from her husband that give her hope that he will come home one day. Lesia Bakalets for VOA News, Warsaw.
According to the most recent available statistics, Sudan and Chad each have more than 300 students enrolled in U.S. academic institutions. Back home along the Chad-Sudan border, humanitarian groups say refugees from the war-torn Darfur region face catastrophic conditions. VOA's Henry Wilkins has more.
Rahaf is 18 months old. She has just been brought to a field medical centre near Adre, Chad, to receive treatment for malnutrition. Her mother, Riham Abdallah Idris, fled with her from Sudan's Darfur region 3 months ago. Since then, they've been in desperate need of food assistance, but almost none has arrived.
Yes, it has been 3 months. We are facing a shortage of both food and funds. Unfortunately, there's an inadequate supply of nourishment for both children and mothers. The children are unwell.
In August, Doctors Without Borders, also known as MSF, short for its French name Médecins Sans Frontières, called on the international community multiple times to give money to alleviate the Sudan crisis triggered by its civil war that started in April. They say that some refugees have gone 5 weeks without food aid and that there is now a malnutrition crisis in eastern Chad. According to the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the international community has donated just 26% of the funding needed to deal with the crisis. Many humanitarian organisations in eastern Chad say they are hamstrung as a result. Kenneth Lavelle, an operations director with MSF, recently visited the refugee sites in eastern Chad.
I've not seen something like that in years. I was lost for words when I did the first tour around Adre camp. There's 200,000 people there in the most appalling conditions. I think we're already beyond the brink. I think we're already in a humanitarian catastrophe.
The Sudanese government distributes food to its citizens in nearby Oran, Chad. But what the war-torn country can provide is a drop in the ocean relative to the size of the need. One Chadian analyst says that the host communities deserve a response too, as the crisis strains the local market for food, and that a proper response could help prevent Sudan's insecurity from spreading to Chad.
Actually finding a solution to the suffer of those that cross in Chad might be also a way of contributing to conflict management and conflict prevention and ramping up insecurity in Chad, as those people might be turning to illegal ways of earning their lives. So, there are a lot of risks.
Asked what the international community could do to help her and her baby, Idris said,
"It's imperative for them to furnish food for the infirm. For instance, biscuits or milk would be greatly appreciated, as malnutrition is affecting the children severely."
As the desperately underfunded Sudan crisis continues, humanitarians say they are at a loss as to how to get donors' attention. In recent months, South Sudan has received hundreds of thousands of the displaced, mostly returnees of South Sudanese origin, who passed through the town of Renk on the Sudan border here. One, Yana Liwa, said she fled the country with no possessions.
I just fled without anything in hand. I wasn't able to take anything from my home. We were living in a makeshift tent, so when the bombs started to fall on our compound, we fled as fast as we could.
As thousands continue to arrive in South Sudan every week, Egypt, on Sudan's northern border, has effectively stopped refugees from entering the country. Initially, it allowed around 250,000 to cross its border, but a new rule in June required Sudanese to obtain a visa to enter. Rights groups say this violates international standards, and onerous wait times for visas endanger those trying to flee. Abdullahi Halake is with Refugees International.
Egypt is also experiencing serious economic crisis, and as a result, it is very, very careful on the number of people it's allowing in. And I think this is where, countries like the United States need to lean on Egypt and UNHCR to ask the Egyptian authorities to allow the Sudanese to come in. But that is not enough.
He added that donor countries must increase humanitarian funding to Egypt if they expect the country to begin taking refugees again. Other Sudanese neighbours, including Libya and Central African Republic, have their own security problems, and few are seeking refuge in either country. Fleeing to Eritrea on Sudan's eastern border would be an even worse choice for those seeking to escape the war, according to Eritrea Focus, a UK-based human rights group. The government is known as one of the most authoritarian and isolated regimes in the world, sometimes referred to as the North Korea of Africa.
And indeed, the president has said that the Sudanese people are welcome to come to Eritrea. How many Sudanese have actually taken that offer is unknown. And why would anybody want to seek refuge in Eritrea?
As international aid groups are not active in Eritrea, it's unclear whether any Sudanese refugees have arrived in the country. But even for those who have managed to escape, like Bokra Hassan Abdallah, who recently arrived in Chad, the difficulties do not end.
We were forced to abandon our homes due to attacks by Janjaweed. As you can see, our current circumstances are a result of this displacement. Regrettably, I had to leave without my identity documents.
Lacking identity documents can make it hard for the displaced to register as refugees in Chad, in turn making it difficult to obtain support. As options for where to flee narrow, the number of internally displaced in Sudan is approaching 4 million, almost 4 times the number of refugees. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Adre, Chad.
Native Americans were deprived of education regarding their native cultures. They were coerced into attending residential schools operated by the U.S. government, which had a preference for assimilation. However, in present times, there are only a few schools remaining that not only acknowledge, but also celebrate Native culture. VOA's Michael Sullivan went to Riverside, California to tell us more.
Through much of the 19th and part of the 20th century, U.S. authorities forced many indigenous children into boarding schools, where they learned domestic and farming skills and were forced to abandon their religions, languages, and cultures. In Riverside, California, family members heard the stories of survivors at Sherman Indian High School, one of a handful of remaining government-funded boarding schools where today Native cultures are embraced instead of suppressed. U.S. Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland and Assistant Secretary Brian Newland, both Native Americans, came to listen as part of the department's year-long tour called The Road to Healing. Curiosity brought one woman.
I'm here because I wanted to see where my grandparents went to school, where they were taken, and also where my dad was born.
Her grandparents fell in love here, and her family adopted a strategy to fight prejudice.
They came out of the situation basically saying, well, the white man won the war, and maybe the only way to end discrimination for our kids would be education.
Some stories ended badly. About 60 former Sherman Indian High School students who died while attending the school are buried in a nearby cemetery, victims through the years of disease or accidents. At some Indian schools, students were the victims of abuse. Erica Ben, a Navajo and more recent student here, says her time at the school expanded her horizons. She's working on a doctorate in the field of Native education.
I never really encountered anybody other than Navajos. So when I came here and the school was open to all students all across the nation, right? So, and that was my actual first time actually interacting with other Native tribes besides myself. And that was just, for me, that was an experience, I'm not going to forget.
Greg Colluck of the Luiseno Indians sees renewed interest in the traditions among young people.
All 4 of my children are they're participating in the cultural things that our tribe is offering, including basket weaving, including language, beating, and such.
Like many Native Americans, they're re-embracing their culture and learning about a painful history of forced assimilation. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News, Riverside, California.
Thank you for being with us. Stay up to date with all the latest news at voanews.com. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at VOA News. Follow me on X, formerly Twitter, at EliTV1. Catch up on past episodes at our free streaming service, VOA+. For all those behind the scenes who brought you today's show, I'm Elizabeth Lee. We'll see you next week on The Inside Story.
And that's a wrap for today and for the whole week. Hopefully you've been a tad more informed and even more enlightened with this feature presentation. And I look forward to next week's set of offerings as well as you. Till then, keep in mind to always work hard, aim high, be kind, stay true, and catch the news right here on PTV. This has been Sharms Espina for Stories from the Grid.